I've been a patrol officer in a quiet suburban district for almost 5 years. Most of my calls are routine: noise complaints, traffic stops, and the occasional burglary. But there's one night that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. It started with a call about a possible break-in at an abandoned house on Hollow Street. The house had a reputation. Neighbors swore it was haunted, and kids loved to tell stories about hearing strange noises coming from inside. I'd driven past it dozens of times, but I'd never had a reason to go inside. Until that night. I arrived just after midnight, the neighborhood eerily quiet. The house was a two-story colonial, its windows boarded up and its yard overgrown with weeds. My spotlight revealed a broken window on the ground floor and the faint outline of muddy footprints leading inside. I radioed dispatch to let them know I was on the scene and began my approach. The air felt heavy as I walked up the cracked stone path. The wooden door creaked open when I pushed on it, revealing a dark, musty interior. My flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and scattered debris on the floor. I called out, "This is the police. Is anyone here?" But the only response was the echo of my own voice. The main floor was empty, though there were signs someone had been there recently. An old sleeping bag in the corner, an empty soda can, and a crumpled fast food wrapper. I was about to call it in and clear the scene when I heard it. A soft creak from upstairs. My heart started pounding. I drew my weapon and slowly ascended the staircase, the wood groaning under my boots. At the top, there were 3 doors, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The air grew colder as I approached the first door, which was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with the barrel of my gun. The room was empty except for an old rocking chair in the corner. It was swaying gently, though there was no breeze. My flashlight swept the room, but there was no sign of anyone. I closed the door and moved to the second bedroom. This one was darker, the windows completely boarded up. My flashlight revealed graffiti scrawled across the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. In the center of the room, surrounded by candles that had long since burned out, was a makeshift shrine. I stepped closer, my breath visible in the frigid air. The shrine was covered in photographs, all of them of the same young woman. Her face was scratched out in every picture, and beneath them lay a pile of decayed flowers and burnt offerings. That's when I heard the noise again, this time louder, like footsteps, coming from the third room. I swung my flashlight toward the door, which was closed. My gut told me to wait for backup, but something compelled me to move forward. I placed my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room was empty, except for a wardrobe in the corner. Its doors were slightly open, revealing darkness within. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I had to check. I yanked the wardrobe doors open, my flashlight illuminating. Nothing. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. As I turned to leave, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing in the doorway. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart raced as I backed out of the room, my flashlight sweeping every shadow. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard a soft, raspy whisper, "Get out." I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The voice wasn't loud, but it was close, too close. I turned slowly, aiming my light at the top of the stairs. Standing there was a man. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. He was holding something in his hand. A knife? Drop the weapon. I shouted, my voice shaking. Put it down now. The man didn't move. He just stared at me, his lips curling into a twisted smile. Then, without warning, he lunged down the stairs. I fired once, the sound deafening in the confined space. The man crumpled to the floor, the knife clattering from his hand. I kicked the weapon away and called for backup, my hands trembling as I kept my gun trained on him. When backup arrived, they found me standing over the man's lifeless body. But there was something strange. His face didn't match the description of anyone from the area. Later, we discovered he was a transient, living in the house for months, using it as a hideout. As they carried his body out, one of the officers turned to me and said, "You sure you were alone in there?" "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach nodding. He pointed to the muddy footprints leading from the house. "There are 2 sets. I never went back to Hollow Street, and I never found out who or what those other footprints belonged to. It was a quiet night, the kind that makes you feel like the entire world is asleep except for you. I was nearing the end of my shift when the call came in, a frantic voice reporting strange activity near Blackthorn Woods. The caller claimed they'd seen lights flickering deep in the forest and heard what sounded like a woman crying. Dispatch marked it as a possible disturbance, but in a small town like ours, it could have been anything. A camping party gone too loud, someone lost, or just nerves playing tricks. Still, I was the closest unit, so I responded. The drive to Blackthorn Woods was uneventful, but as I pulled up to the narrow dirt road leading into the forest, the atmosphere changed. The trees loomed tall and dark, their gnarled branches forming eerie shapes against the moonlit sky. I parked the car at the trailhead, leaving the headlights on to cut through the darkness. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint scent of moss and decay. I radioed in my location. Unit 57 on scene at Blackthorn Woods. Investigating possible disturbance. Will report. The dispatcher acknowledged, her voice crackling through the static. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the path. The forest swallowed the light quickly, leaving only a narrow beam to guide me. The ground was soft beneath my boots, muffling my steps as I ventured deeper. The trail was overgrown in places, forcing me to push through thick bushes and low-hanging branches. Every now and then, I'd hear the faint rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig, but the woods felt empty, too empty. After about 15 minutes, I found the source of the lights. In a small clearing, surrounded by a circle of trees, were dozens of lanterns hanging from the branches. They swayed gently in the breeze, casting flickering shadows across the ground. At the center of the clearing stood an old wooden chair, its paint peeling and one leg slightly askew. On the chair sat a porcelain doll, its face cracked and its glassy eyes staring straight ahead. I shone my flashlight around the clearing, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But there was no one. The air was still, and the only sound was the faint creak of the lanterns swinging in the trees. "This is Unit 57, I said into my radio. "I've located the source of the disturbance. Appears to be some kind of setup, possibly a prank. No sign of anyone present." There was a long pause before dispatch responded. "Copy that, Unit 57. Proceed with caution. Do you require backup?" I considered it for a moment, but decided against it. "Negative. I'll check the area and report back." I approached the chair, my flashlight focused on the doll. Something about it made my skin crawl. The way its cracked face seemed to smile, the way its eyes glinted in the light. As I got closer, I noticed something carved into the armrests of the chair. Symbols I didn't recognize, looping and intersecting like some kind of bizarre language. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Help me." I froze, my flashlight darting around the clearing. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is the police. If you need help, come out where I can see you." No response. I scanned the trees, but the shadows seemed to shift and move, making it hard to focus. Then the whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me." It was coming from deeper in the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, leaving the clearing behind. The whispers grew louder as I pushed through the undergrowth, their tones shifting from pleading to urgent. They seemed to echo from every direction, pulling me deeper and deeper into the forest. That's when I saw it, a figure standing between the trees. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. I shone my flashlight on it, but the light seemed to bend around the figure, refusing to illuminate it fully. "Police!" I shouted, raising my weapon. "Show me your hands." The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. "Show me your hands." I repeated, my voice cracking. Then, without a sound, the figure turned and vanished into the trees. I ran after it, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I navigated the uneven terrain. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, until they stopped abruptly. I found myself in another clearing. At the center was a shallow pit, filled with ash and charred wood. Around the pit were more of those strange symbols, carved into the ground like some kind of ritual. And in the middle of the pit was a single shoe, small, pink, and covered in dirt. My heart sank as I recognized it. A few months earlier, a little girl had gone missing in this area. Despite extensive searches, she was never found. I radioed for backup immediately, my voice shaking as I described what I'd found. As I waited, I kept my flashlight trained on the pit, half expecting the figure to return. But the woods were silent now, as if holding their breath. When backup arrived, we searched the area thoroughly, but there was no sign of the figure or the girl. The doll, the chair, and the lanterns were gone, as if they'd never been there. To this day, I don't know what I saw in those woods. The case of the missing girl remains unsolved, and every time I pass Blackthorn Woods, I feel a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Something is out there, watching, waiting, and it's not finished. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and I was on patrol in a stretch of town where nothing ever seemed to happen. My partner, Mike, and I were finishing up a routine round when the call came in. A 911 hang-up from a motel on the outskirts of town. The dispatcher noted that the caller hadn't said anything, but faint whispering could be heard before the line went dead. "Could be a prank," Mike said as we pulled into the gravel lot of the Pinecrest Motel. The place was a dive, with flickering neon signs and cracked asphalt. The kind of place people stayed when they didn't want to be found. "Or not," I replied, scanning the rows of dimly lit windows. Most of the rooms looked vacant, their curtains drawn tight. Only a few had lights on, and one stood out. A single room with the curtains half open and a faint glow spilling onto the lot. The manager was a wiry man with thick glasses, and he didn't seem thrilled to see us. "Room 12, he said gruffly when we explained the call. "No one's supposed to be in there. Been empty for weeks." "Anyone with a key?" Mike asked. He shook his head. "Not since the last tenant skipped out. Haven't bothered renting it since. Too much trouble." That was already strange, but it got worse when we approached the room. The door was slightly ajar, the wood splintered around the lock. I radioed for backup, but dispatch was tied up with a crash across town, so it was just the two of us. "Ready?" Mike asked, his hand on his holster. I nodded, pushing the door open with my flashlight. The room was cold, unnaturally so. The air felt damp, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something metallic. The bed was unmade, the sheets twisted like someone had left in a hurry. A single lamp flickered weakly on the nightstand, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. "Police," Mike called out. "Anyone here?" No response. We split up to check the room. Mike inspected the bathroom while I focused on the main area. That's when I noticed the writing. Scrawled across the walls in a dark, sticky substance were dozens of words and symbols. Some were familiar. Pleas for help, prayers, but others were indecipherable, looping and jagged like a language I'd never seen. My stomach turned as I realized the substance was blood, dried and flaking but unmistakable. "Mike," I called, my voice shaky. "You need to see this." But Mike didn't answer. I turned toward the bathroom just as the door slammed shut. I ran over, pounding on it. "Mike, are you okay?" Nothing. I threw my shoulder against the door, forcing it open. The bathroom was empty, the small window above the sink wide open. A cold breeze swept through, making the shower curtain flutter. I radioed for Mike, but all I got was static. Panic set in as I stepped back into the main room. That's when I saw the figure. It was standing in the corner, partially hidden by the shadows. At first, I thought it was Mike, but as I shone my flashlight on it, I realized it wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its head too large and tilted at an unnatural angle. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its hollow eyes reflected the flickering light. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure raised one hand, its bony fingers pointing toward the wall. Slowly, I turned my head, following its gesture. The writing on the wall had changed. Now, it spelled out two words, written over and over, "Get out." When I turned back, the figure was gone. I didn't wait. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. Outside, the night felt warmer, but my heart was racing. I searched the lot, calling for Mike, but he was nowhere to be found. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. Together, we searched the room, the lot, and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of Mike or the figure. The writing on the walls had disappeared, replaced by cracked and peeling paint. The case was ruled a disappearance, but I knew better. Something was in that room, something that shouldn't exist. I never found out what happened to Mike, and I don't think I want to. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers, faint and distant, but unmistakable, and they always say the same thing: get out? It was a little after 2 a.m. when the call came in. An alarm triggered at the old Riverview Mall on the edge of town. Once a bustling shopping center, the place had been abandoned for years after a fire gutted half the structure. Most of the locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed, but that didn't stop vandals and urban explorers from sneaking inside. Dispatch tagged it as a routine alarm, likely set off by a stray animal or a faulty sensor. Still, protocol required a response, and as the nearest unit, I was sent to check it out. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'd been a cop for almost 6 years and had seen plenty of abandoned buildings at night. Riverview was just another one, or so I thought. The mall loomed dark and massive as I pulled into the cracked, overgrown parking lot. The glow from my cruiser's headlights barely cut through the thick fog that clung to the ground. I parked near the main entrance, where a set of rusted, glass double doors hung slightly ajar, one shattered completely. Unit 34 on scene at Riverview Mall, I radioed in. Investigating alarm. No backup needed at this time. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car, the cool night air pressing down on me. As I approached the entrance, I noticed something strange. One of the doors looked freshly scratched, long gouges cutting into the metal frame. My pulse quickened, but I brushed it off. Maybe vandals had been here recently. Inside, the mall was eerily silent. My footsteps echoed on the tiled floor, which was littered with debris, broken glass, crumpled papers, and the occasional piece of charred wood. My flashlight cast long, dancing shadows across the empty storefronts, their display windows coated in a thick layer of grime. I called out, "This is the police. Anyone here?" My voice seemed to vanish into the cavernous space, swallowed by the darkness. The alarm system had gone quiet by the time I entered, leaving only the faint hum of the wind whistling through broken skylights. I checked the first-floor stores, one by one, finding nothing but dust and decay. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. About 20 minutes into my sweep, I heard it, a faint sound, like the shuffle of feet on the upper level. I stopped, holding my breath, and listened. There it was again, louder this time. Someone was up there. Unit 34, I said into my radio, keeping my voice low. I've got possible trespassers on the second floor. Continuing to investigate. The staircase leading up was partially collapsed, forcing me to take a detour through what used to be a department store. The air grew colder as I climbed, the flashlight beam barely illuminating the narrow, crumbling stairwell. By the time I reached the second floor, my gut was telling me to turn back, but I didn't. The upper level was worse than the first. Most of the ceiling tiles had caved in, leaving jagged beams exposed. Water dripped steadily from somewhere, forming small puddles that shimmered in the light. As I swept my flashlight across the space, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting behind a pillar at the far end of the corridor. "Police!" I called out, raising my weapon. "Come out with your hands up." No response. I moved toward the pillar, my heart hammering in my chest. When I rounded the corner, there was no one there. Just an empty hallway leading to a row of boarded-up windows. But then I noticed something on the floor. A child's shoe, small and scuffed, lying in the middle of the corridor. I stared at it, unease crawling up my spine. The mall had been closed for years. There shouldn't have been anything like that here. Then the sound came again, this time directly behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my grip. Standing about 10 feet away was a figure. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows, but its posture was unnatural, its head tilted sharply to one side. "Stay where you are," I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, silent and still, as though it were studying me. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like I was being pulled into some invisible current. And then it whispered, "Help me." The voice was faint, distorted, as if coming from a badly tuned radio. It didn't match the figure's shape, sounding more like a child's plea than anything else. I took a step back, my flashlight flickering as the air around me seemed to grow heavier. The figure tilted its head even further, the motion impossibly sharp. Then it began to move, not walking, but gliding, its feet never touching the ground. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, my boots pounding against the broken tiles as the whispering grew louder, surrounding me. It wasn't just one voice now. It was many, overlapping in a chaotic, desperate chorus. When I reached the main entrance, I didn't stop. I burst through the shattered doors and into the parking lot, not daring to look back. I jumped into my cruiser and radioed for backup, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the mic. By the time other units arrived, the whispers were gone. The mall was silent, and there was no sign of the figure. But when we reviewed the footage from my body cam, there was something chilling. In the frame, just before I turned to run, the flashlight caught the figure's face for a split second. It wasn't human. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, and its skin was pale and cracked like porcelain. The mall was sealed off permanently a month later, and I heard it's set to be demolished soon. But even if it's gone, I'll never forget that night. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those whispers, faint and far away. And they always say the same thing, "Help me."